Is Virgo a youthful sign? This question came up in conversation with a friend a few days ago, and she seemed surprised when I came down on the side of yes, Virgo can be, and in fact is, a youthful sign. Such a statement seems to fly in the face of what Virgo is perceived to be conventionally. What are some of the cliched keywords we hear in reference to this sign? Nagging, critical, hypochondriac, neurotic. None of these keywords are very inspiring or uplifting or, dare I say, helpful to those who happen to have an emphasis in Virgo. None of it's helpful. So, for all of you who do have an emphasis in Virgo and are hoping to hear something a little bit more positive than critical, nagging, hypochondriac, fretting, worrisome, and on and on and on, then this video and presentation is for you. In fact, I'll extend it not only to people who have an emphasis on Virgo, but to anybody who has an emphasis on any of the mutable signs. Because all of the mutable signs are associated with youthfulness. Now, since I'm feeling audacious today, I will extend the concept even further. Every human being on Earth has some kind of an emphasis on the mutable signs, in the sense that the mutable signs are somewhere in the chart. So everybody on Earth has the potential to mobilize the mutable signs and tap into a wellspring of authentic, eternal youthfulness. And this concept is encapsulated in this grainy, rather disturbing image of a moon-faced individual who has apparently a full-grown human being attached to a umbilical cord in his heart. Presumably that would be the inner child which dwells within all of us. Those students of psychology and psychiatry might recognize that inner child as the puer aeternus. And this is our first linkage to eternal youth, at least for the Mercury-ruled signs, because Mercury is the puer aeternus. That's a fancy Latin phrase which means immortal boy. Right? There's a feminine equivalent to denote immortal girl, but you get the idea. It's the archetype of the person who's forever young. Somebody like Johnny Depp, who does have an emphasis in mutable signs. And here we have a rather ghastly Peter Pan, and I might add, a rather middle-aged Peter Pan, which kind of highlights my point. Peter Pan is the de facto modern variant of the puer aeternus, the eternally youthful being, the archetype of eternal youth. Peter Pan is the de facto figure from literature who embodies this myth. So what's the linkage to the mutable signs? Flight. In traditional astrology, at least 3 of the mutable signs were classified as winged, having wings. These were Virgo, Gemini, and even Pisces. Only Sagittarius did not have wings, and this is because it was half of a horse. Right? Everything from 15 degrees Sagittarius onward is the horse half. Everything prior to 15 degrees Sagittarius is the rational human half. But the other 3 mutable signs are winged, meaning they have the ability to cover vast amounts of terrain in a short amount of time. This might translate into imagination and a spirit of experimentation. This is what confers the air of youthfulness upon the mutable signs. So the ability of the mutable signs to take flight allows them to not only have some fun flying, metaphorically speaking, but to also to conduct some reconnaissance. When you're able to fly, you can cover vast amounts of terrain and see everything that's happening beneath you. Now, these might translate into traits like curiosity and inquisitiveness, for which the mutable signs are famed. Inquisitiveness is a childlike trait, and it's at the heart of passion. So this curiosity fuels the learning that the mutable signs are most capable of doing. That's their one of their special powers in the world, to learn things. So we see Tinkerbell. She has her wings and she's flitting about like some kind of anthropomorphized moth. She's flying around, gathering data, surveying the territory around and beneath her, and she's learning. So let's say that Tinkerbell is what we might call a salamander, an elemental spirit of fire. Okay, let's say Tinkerbell represents Sagittarius, mutable fire. What kind of intelligence and data is she gathering? What is she learning about? She's learning about the subject matter and the substance and the keywords of the fire element. Identity. That's what Sagittarius does. It learns about its identity by going beyond boundaries. Now, with Sagittarius, the notion of going beyond boundaries isn't signified by having wings and flying. It's signified by the chimerical nature, the hybridized nature of the sign. All the mutable signs are double-bodied. And whereas Pisces, Mercury, Gemini, and Virgo have wings, Sagittarius has the chimerical, blended body, the dual nature. Right? It's a hybrid creature, semi-divine, semi-immortal, and semi-human. So all the mutable signs are bicorporeal and double-bodied, thereby representing something that is almost transhuman. And this transhuman capacity enables the mutable signs to gather information. Right? So if Tinkerbell were an earth elemental, a gnome, we might say a little winged gnome, then she would be learning about material things, practical methods, how stuff works, what stuff is made out of. This is different from the knowledge of Gemini. Right? Virgo has a kind of intuitive knowledge about how things work. For example, if Virgo wanted to learn how to play the guitar, it would just buy a guitar and an amp and start plugging away at it and figure it out. Whereas Gemini would get 6 or 7 books, make sure it had a teacher, stocked up on tutorial videos and all of that stuff. Virgo had to figure things out by instinct. What if Tinkerbell were associated with the air element? Then she would be Gemini. And the learning would have to do with social behavior, people, right? Dealing with others, social situations. If Tinkerbell were associated with water, then she would be Piscean, and the learning would happen on the emotional sphere and in the imaginative realm. In fact, for Pisces, the youthful experience of education on the soul level can be a little disturbing, a little disorienting. Right? It's still a youthful energy, but here we might see the dark side of youth, the eternocene nature of youth, and by that I mean the in-between nature of youth. There's something about the very young that seems to be in between incarnations. The very young still have a little bit of the residue of the void clinging to them, right? Just like the very aged, they're in an in-between place too. And that's what mutability is all about. Astrological mutability dwells in the in-between places. It thrives in the borderlands. There's yet another linkage to eternal youth that the mutable signs have. In ancient astrology, at least one source says that the mutable signs thrive, quote unquote, in the East. And by that, the source meant that The East was the actual rising sign, so we might think that the mutable signs thrive on the rising sign. But also the East refers to the hemisphere of the East, everything on the eastern side of the meridian line, everything to the left of the MCIC axis. And there's yet a third sense of the word East. It can refer to the quadrant of the midheaven to the ascendant, and also the quadrant of the IC to the descendant. Those are also the eastern quadrants. Now, in all mythology, the East is associated with youth because the sun rises there and is reborn there. That's the origin of the sun. Now, interestingly enough, most of the mutable signs were also categorized classically as being barren or sterile. The exceptions are Pisces, which was actually considered to be extremely fertile, and Sagittarius, which was moderately fertile. Mercury and Virgo, Gemini and Virgo, the signs of Mercury, they were thought to be barren, which is appropriate for youthfulness, a state of eternal youthfulness. It seems like the trade-off would be one's fertility, one's ability to reproduce. There's already one of you that's going to exist forever. You don't need to reproduce. So barrenness and sterility, few children, if any children, these were associated especially with Mercury signs, and this is yet another bridge to eternal youth. When you have children, the focus shifts away from yourself into your child. Something inside of you withers and dies on the vine. What could be more lethal than children? You look at your child and you can see yourself laying in your coffin. You know that the generations will march on, and soon it's going to be your turn. Kids remind us of that. But when you're forever young, then you can retain all of your puerile fantasies, all of your infantile dreams. The focus remains on you. So how does all of this work out in the chart? Look at the house position of the mutable signs, because those houses, the life areas of those houses, will represent a domain where you can access your eternal inner child through a spirit of experimentation and learning and adapting to the lessons that you have learned. This will awaken a spirit of youthfulness inside of you. So you don't have to have necessarily the mutable signs on the angles or even planets in the mutable signs. Let's say that you have the mutable signs in the 8th house and the 2nd house. And in a situation like that, we might say that the lessons one adapts to, the spirit of experimentation one has, might revolve around resources and livelihood, both one's own and the resources of other people. So the mutable signs give us access to a fountain of youth. But again, most of the mutable signs are sterile. So when we deal in the domain of mutability, the focus it is on one's own development, one's own abilities. One doesn't really reproduce oneself, one becomes double-bodied. And this bicorporeal nature is itself a species of fertility. So when we deal with astrological mutability, we are actually dealing with ramifying the self, branching the self out, doubling it, tripling it, quadrupling it, having multiple profiles of the self. And this will confer a spirit of eternal youthfulness on you. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I hope it gave you some food for thought. And I will see you guys in another video. Ciao.